Anna Ramsey had come 3 days by coach on the word of a man she had never met, and Tobias McKenna was waiting at the edge of the boardwalk when she stepped down. He looked at her the way a man looks at a purchase that has arrived wrong. He did not take long to say so. "You're not what the letters suggested." Loud enough to carry. The kind of loud that is a decision, not a slip. "I had a picture. This isn't it." The street held its Tuesday morning. A woman outside the dry goods, a man at the farrier's gate, a boy with a bucket stopped in the road, and none of it moved. Anna stood with her bag at her feet and her hands loose at her sides. She let him finish. She had built a long patience for rooms where she was not enough, and she was not going to spend it here. Tobias kept talking. The journey was not his concern. A man had a right to his expectations. He was still going when the boots came down the hardware steps across the road. The man who crossed the street was broad and unhurried, with the jaw of someone who had not found a reason to shave this week, and hands that had been doing real work long enough they had changed shape around it. He stopped between Tobias and Anna, and looked at Tobias with a quiet that had something solid behind it. "That's not how you treat a lady." Tobias's chin came up. "This is my business." "You put it in the middle of the street." "No heat in it, just fact." "Whatever you had to say, you've said it. Now you're done." Tobias looked at the man's size. He looked at the boardwalk watching. He looked at Anna once more, reprising something he had already decided to leave, and straightened his coat, and walked to his horse, and rode out without looking back. The street let out a breath. The man turned to her. He looked at her bag. He looked at her face, which was holding by an arrangement she had made with herself somewhere around the second day of the journey. "You have people here?" She had nothing here. Not any more. "No," she said. He picked up her bag. "Einar Holmstrom. Cabin up the ridge. Back room's empty." He said it the way you state weather. "Yours until you've worked out what's next." She looked at him. Not a polished man. Not a gentle one. A man who had seen something wrong and walked across a street about it. "Anna Ramsey. I cook well." "Good. The larder's been thin since October." They walked off the end of the street together, and the town watched them go and set immediately to the work of deciding what it all meant. The trail up the ridge took the better part of an hour. Einar did not fill it with reassurance, and Anna did not need him to. She watched the ground. The ground was manageable. Everything else was not yet. The cabin sat on a slope above the valley with a woodpile along the south wall, and a horse in the east pen who lifted her head when they came through the gate, assessed them, and went back to her hay. Inside was the clean of a man alone with a system. Spare, ordered, nothing in it without a purpose. A stone fireplace with good draw. A workbench along the far wall with tools hung in rows precise enough that each one's absence would show. A table and 2 chairs that had not come into the world as a pair. He showed her the back room, east-facing window. A quilt on the bed folded with more precision than the moment required, which told her something about him before he had said much at all. Up before light. Trapline before the cold sets in. Coffee's on when I leave. Breakfast will be ready when you're back. He looked at her the way a man looks when he expected to negotiate and found nothing to negotiate with. He pulled the door to and left her alone with it. She stood in the small room and breathed. Through the window the valley was going gold along its far ridge. The pines moved in a wind she could not hear from inside. She unpacked with method, dress on the peg, comb on the sill. She washed her face and went to learn the larder. It was as thin as advertised. She was still working through what could be done with it when the rain came in off the peaks, cold and steady, and hit the roof with purpose. And then, in the corner above the window, a drip. Slow at first, patient, working at the ceiling the way water works at anything given enough time. She found a pot on the kitchen shelf and set it under the drip and went back to the larder. Outside, the rain kept on. The pot filled with a sound like a clock. She was a guest in a strange man's cabin with nowhere else to be, and she had not yet earned the right to mention a leaking roof, so she did not mention it. He came in that evening, sat down, and looked at the pot in the corner. He said nothing about it. She said nothing about it. They ate while the rain kept on. She emptied the pot once between supper and the washing up, and he watched her do it. And it was the first wordless agreement they made. The first morning she had biscuits and salt pork and coffee on the table when his boots came up the steps. He ate with the focus of a man who had been in cold air since before light. Partway through he looked up briefly. "Board on the left side of the pen. Nell finds it when the ground's soft." "I'll keep to the right." He nodded. That was breakfast. She spent the morning learning the cabin by attention. The axe handle was new, the blade old and well kept. A shelf for things needing repair held 2 items, never more. The quilt on her bed had been mended in 4 places with stitching finer than those hands suggested. He had done it himself, somewhere, unhurried, and said nothing about it. She filed all of it away. It was too early for conclusions. The second rain came a week later. She had the pot in place before dark. In the morning she emptied it in the yard and came back in to find, on the workbench under a square of canvas, a bundle of cedar shingles and a small pot of pitch. She looked at them. She went and made breakfast. 3 days later, on a clear morning while she worked the brush along Nell's neck, she heard him on the roof, steady, methodical, a man taking his time with something that mattered. She stayed with the mare. Nell stood with her eyes half closed in the pale sun, and the sound of the work came down from above until it stopped. When Anna came back in, the corner of her room was dry. She left the pot there a full week before returning it to the kitchen shelf. When she did, neither of them spoke about it, and the matter was closed. By the end of the second week, she had turned the thin larder into a soup that smelled better than it had any right to. He came in from the yard, stopped just inside the door, stood a moment. Then he hung his coat and sat down. He ate. He set his spoon down. "What do you need from town?" She had the list ready: flour, salt, lard, dried beans, pepper, and thread. "Thursday. I'll take you." The days found their shape. He was out before light, and the coffee was ready when he left and waiting when he came back. He never remarked on it, but she could see that he noticed, in the slight change of how he sat down at the table, a man who has stopped bracing for what will be missing. She learned him by accumulation. That Nell was spoken to quietly when her hooves were checked and fed by measure rather than habit, that the tools were oiled whether or not they had been used that week, that he ate steadily when the food was adequate and ate more when it was good, which was the only compliment he seemed to have, and which she came to prefer to the spoken kind. Thursday he took her into town. The street received them with the careful attention of a place that has formed a theory and is collecting evidence. The storekeeper tallied slowly and glanced once at Einar before returning to his figures. A woman named Prentice, coming out of the milliner's, slowed to observe with the expression of someone storing things for later use. Einar paid for the supplies, and Anna did not argue it because she understood he had no use for ceremony around practical matters. She would square it when she had means. Walking back, he carried the flour sack without being asked. She kept his pace without requiring him to slow it. That evening she made bread. The smell reached the porch where he was working a length of harness leather, and she heard his hands go still for a moment before they resumed. She left the bread on the board and the lamp lit, and when he came through the door, he looked at the table and then at her and said nothing at all, which was exactly right. The following Sunday she helped stack benches after the service, and the teacher, a small, precise woman named Aldred, stopped her on the church steps. She asked if Anna might cover the younger children 2 mornings a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, while she tended the older ones. She said she had heard Anna was capable, and that the mountain man's cabin was in better order than it had been in years, which was not nothing as a reference. Anna said she would think on it and let her know by Thursday. Walking back through town, she passed the storekeeper's wife, who nodded at her with the careful nod of a woman revising an opinion she had formed in haste. It was a small thing. Anna noted it without making too much of it, the way you note a change in weather. Useful information, not cause for celebration. She told Einar about the teacher's offer at supper. He listened. He said it was her decision. She took the mornings. The week after that, she came back from Tuesday lessons to find that he had repaired the hinge on the back room door, the one that had been catching since she arrived, that she had learned to lift slightly on opening. It moved cleanly now. He had not mentioned he planned to do it. There was a small curl of shaved metal on the floor near the frame that he had not yet swept, which was the only evidence of the work. She hung her coat. She did not mention the hinge either. Some things in the cabin had begun to operate this way, attended to quietly, without discussion. The woodpile restocked before she thought to ask. Her basin filled before she came in from the cold. These were not gestures toward her. They were the habits of a man extending his particular care to include one more thing. She understood the difference and valued it more for that. 3 weeks in, on a gray afternoon with weather coming off the peaks, he brought the guitar out to the porch. She heard it from the kitchen. Low and unhurried, a short phrase returning to itself. She went still with the dishcloth in her hands. The notes were careful, worn smooth by long use, not performed, not cheerful. The playing of a man who has run out of other ways to set something down. She dried her hands and went to the door. He did not stop, did not look up. His big hands moved on the strings with a gentleness that had nowhere else to go. She stayed in the doorway. Would you play it again? From the start. He looked up. His hands rested on the strings. Then he played it from the start. She sat on the step below him and looked out at the valley going gray under the coming weather. He played it through once and let the last note go. Neither of them spoke after. She asked him days later where the song had come from. He turned the guitar in his hands. My father played it, evenings when things sat heavy on him. I learned it after he was gone. He looked at the neck of the guitar. Keeps the quiet from going the wrong way. She nodded and let it stay there. She noticed the crack along the lower seam of the case not long after. Old damage, repaired once with leather stitching now pulling loose at one end. One morning while he was on the trapline, she took the case to the table with her own thread and needle and sat in the early light and restitched it all the way along, careful and even. She set it back exactly where it had been and went to start the bread. He found it that evening. He stood with the case across both hands for a long moment. He set it down with more care than usual and went to wash up for supper. At the table he was quiet in the way of a man holding something he has no adequate words for. She passed him the bread. He took it, and that was enough, and more. The town made up its mind about them the way towns do, not all at once, but by accumulation, one sighting adding to the last. She was seen at the general store, at the church steps, at the schoolhouse on Tuesday and Friday mornings. People adjusted their version of events. At first the story had been the woman abandoned on the street, situation uncertain. After a month it had become something else. The woman who had steadied Holmstrom's cabin, who had the teacher's confidence, who came down from the ridge on Thursdays and walked like someone who knew where she was going. Tobias McKenna heard all of it from a boarding house 2 towns over. He had not wanted her. He had said so in the street with witnesses. But the town had watched the mountain man take her in with more decency than Tobias had managed. And the story that came back to him was not the one he had been telling himself. He had never been a man who could tolerate another man holding the better version of events. That, more than anything, was what brought him back. It reached him through a man passing through who mentioned, without meaning anything by it, that the mountain man had been seen buying flour and coffee and a spool of dark ribbon. Not the kind of purchase a man made for himself. Tobias rode back. He found them on a Saturday morning, Anna and Einar coming off the general store steps, she with a wrapped parcel, he with rope on his shoulder, and stepped into the middle of the road. He had his hat in his hands. He had practiced the manner. "Anna." He kept his voice measured, reasonable. "I spoke poorly that day. I can see that now." She stood with the parcel under her arm and did not fill the silence he left. "I was surprised by the journey. A man can be hasty." He glanced once at Einar, then back to her. "Our arrangement still stands, if you're willing to be sensible about it." The street listened. Einar stood 1 step behind her and to her left. He did not speak. He did not reach for her. He looked at Anna. Tobias pressed on. "You know what was intended between us. Before all of this." Einar's voice was quiet. "Say what you want, but say it to her." Tobias turned back to Anna. The reasonable manner was costing him more now. "I'm willing to put this right. I know what happened." Her voice was level, unhurried. "You said it in front of this street. I wasn't what you pictured. A man can speak poorly. You were clear," she said. "I was clear too. I walked away from it." Tobias looked at the faces along the boardwalk. He looked at Einar, who had not moved. He looked at Anna 1 more time, searching for the answer his expression expected. It was not there. It was not coming. He put his hat on. He mounted his horse. He rode out, and the sound faded, and the street settled into the quiet that follows when the right person has said the thing that needed saying. A woman near the milliner's let out a slow breath. The ordinary sounds of a Saturday came back in around the edges. Einar looked at Anna. The arrangement she had kept on her face since the platform was gone. What was underneath was quieter and more permanent than anything she had put there on purpose. He stood in front of her with the rope still on his shoulder. "You didn't need me for that." "No, but I'm glad you were there." The cold came off the ridge and moved through the street between them. "Come home," he said. Not a proposal decorated for occasion, just the word home set down in front of her like something that already had her name on it. She picked up her parcel. They walked back up the ridge. The preacher came the following week, and the matter was settled quietly and without fuss, and the cabin did not change much after that because it did not need to. The mornings were the same. Dark early, cold, the smell of coffee. 2 cups on the counter where there had been one, which had happened without either of them deciding it. The 2 mismatched chairs still at the table, and neither of them had thought to change that either. She kept the Tuesday and Friday mornings at the schoolhouse. He kept the trap line. On the evenings, she came back later than usual. He had the stove going and the water on without being asked and without remarking on it, which was the shape their household took and which suited them both. She learned him the way you learn a place you have decided to stay, not all at once, but by living in it. That he checked the trap line in the same order every morning because disorder in small things made the day feel loose. That he accepted help without theater, but only when it was clear the help was freely given. That he kept his father's song the way some people keep an old letter, not displayed, not hidden, just present when the weight of quiet got to be too much. He learned her by the evidence she left. The larder never quite as thin as it should have been by week's end. The men did things that did not announce themselves. The way she stood at the kitchen window some mornings looking out at the valley, not unhappy, just taking the measure of the day before it began. The guitar came out on a Tuesday evening in the first deep cold of the season, the kind that comes in under the door and makes the lamp seem warmer than it is. She heard it from the kitchen. The same melody, low, patient, the same bars returning to themselves. She dried her hands and took off her apron and went outside. He was on the porch step. The valley had gone dark below the tree line, and the stars were coming through hard and clear above the ridge. Nell stood quiet in the pen. The chimney smoke went straight up into the still air. She sat beside him, not in the doorway, not one step removed. Beside him, on the step, in the cold, close enough that the warmth between them had nowhere to go but stay. He played the melody through once. It moved out into the dark valley and the pines and came back the way things come back when distance has worked on them. He played it through again. The stars were the kind that only come when the air is clean and cold and there is nothing between you and how far it all goes. Neither of them spoke, because the evening had already said what needed saying, and some things do not improve with words.